The 3 E's of overcoming financial trauma. So I introduce a framework in my book, and the first E stands for exposure. So it's identifying and recognizing that something exists. The second E stands for education, being able to understand how is this showing up in my body? What are the systems, tools, structures that I need to put in place in order to be successful financially. And then the last E, execution. And this is where financial therapy shines. It's where financial counseling shines. And, for the individuals who have maybe had never heard of financial therapy or are not ready to see a financial counselor, this is where you can engage in practices like future self visualization, affirmation, establishing financial boundaries.
Hey there, Fortunes of the Brave listeners. Mary Kathryn Johnson here, CXO for Planet Wealth. Welcome to the conversation. I get to chat with Rahkim Sabree today. Rahkim, how you doing?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, welcome to the conversation. I cannot wait to share some of the really incredible things that Rahkim works on and helps people with. But before we get on to all that stuff, Rahkim, can you just kind of, for the people in the audience listening who may not know exactly who you are and what you do, give us a little hint. Who are you and what do you do?
Sure. So my name is Rahkim Sabree. I am a financial therapist. So many people don't know what a financial therapist is. We're not kind of nestled in the space of financial advisory so much as we are nestled in the space of helping people feel better about their money. I'm also an author of the recently released book, Overcoming Financial Trauma. And financial trauma is actually my area of specialization. So I spend a lot of time producing content, whether it be written, oral, or what have you, around like how do we identify and overcome financial trauma. In addition to that, I am an accredited financial counselor, so I can help people with, the nuts and bolts of their financials, and been in the financial services space since 2011. So coming up on 15 years now.
Wow. Um, I cannot tell you how excited I am to talk to you because, like I was saying before we started, mindset and some of the stuff we tell ourselves and the way we look at situations. Mindset isn't everything, but it impacts everything, and our mindset really does impact. So tell me when you talk about financial trauma, and for those of you listening, just think back to where you started in your financial journey and whatever you were taught growing up about money and about finances. Just start there and think about how you may have shifted the way you look at money and finances. And I think Rakim is going to help you understand a little bit more of that. Am I correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah, because I mean, just myself, I'll just be transparent. I mean, my mom, I remember her saying, so and so, some business owner or some person down the street, they got wall to wall carpeting. Do you believe that? They got wall to wall carpeting. I mean, what do they think? They're rich or something? That, then I was probably 14, right? That put something in my head that, ooh, being rich is bad. And wall to wall carpeting means rich. So I don't know if I want that when I grow up. That's a bad thing, right? Those kinds of thoughts, those kinds of places that we might start our financial journeys or our relationship with money, it sets the tone.
It does. It does. And I
So tell
love,
me how you help people with that.
yeah, you dropped a few little nuggets there that I'll dig into. So, there is an experiment or study that is kind of in circulation that points to how our beliefs around money can be established as early as the age of 7. So you talk about being 14. That's some compounded observations around ideas, around attitudes, around beliefs when it comes to money. And when I talk to people about, as you kind of frame this for the audience, to think about what are some of the earlier memories that you have around money, one of the questions that I ask often is, what is your earliest money memory, right? And then I follow up that question very quickly with a question around who taught you about money? And many times, because of our financial socialization and the taboo associated with that financial socialization, many times people say, well, I didn't learn about money until I got to college, or I didn't learn about money until I started working professionally. And that's not really true, right? We learn about money very differently from how we learn about most things. I think the only thing in comparison to the way that we learn about money is how we learn how to speak, right? We learn how to speak before we actually learn the conventional rules of grammar. And we go to school and then we learn like I before E except after C, right? Money is the same way. We start picking up on the significance of money in our households, the power dynamics that it creates, what it looks like or what it means to be free, what it means to be loved or cared for, right? We make associations in childhood around, if mom and dad can afford to buy us the shiny, fire truck, they must love me. And if they can't, then, maybe they don't love me that much. And so there's so much wrapped up in the early experiences that we have around money. I'll take it a step further, even before we get here our relationship with money is influenced on a genetic level. So the experiences that our parents and our grandparents and our great grandparents had around money, particularly if they were stressful experiences, can influence gene expression through this emerging study around epigenetics. And that influence can increase or rather decrease our sensitivity to cortisol, which is a stress hormone, right? So when we wake up and where we're born into this world, and we have this like heightened level of vigilance when it comes to money, even if we didn't experience financial hardship directly, or if it was a blip in the lifespan, we may still be reacting to the traumas and experiences of previous generations.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I know of some of those studies, and just because, say, my grandparents and my father-in-law was born in 1934, right in the middle of the Depression. So, of course, that impacted his life, and then his son's life, my husband's life, and then our kids' lives. No, you can't say it doesn't impact, but all we can control. So I hear you in that, and I agree, and I'm sure people in the audience are thinking back to their own experiences, their ancestors, their parents, their grandparents' experiences, what they remember, what how money was talked about, if it was talked about at all. And in my household, it was very much negative. There was always an angst, there was always an anxiety, there was always an anger for people who had money, or a fear for not having money, and all the negative emotions were around it. It wasn't. I don't ever remember any positive emotions around money. Um, so, how if that's the case, and we know that's the case, we can't control those things. We can't control what happened and what was said. We can only control what we have now and what we can do forward. And I think to the future, and I don't know if I'm going stepping over some things. I want to talk
No,
about how
you're
we can
fine.
control. Well, I want to talk about how we can control, but what I look at, I have two sons, and what I look at is all I want to do is start them further along than I started, and help them navigate these experiences and these relationships um, easier, easier than I had. So take me through some of that. How can you take someone, and maybe you're talking about trauma with money. I've had many traumas with money, losing lots of it, trying to find it, all those things. Business, I'm an entrepreneur, so yeah,
A hundred
lots of, oh my
percent.
gosh, how am I going to pay that bill, right?
Yes.
All that. So let's start there. How do we handle that trauma? And if you could give us some examples of, say, someone who's dealt with some kind of trauma, you can use me if you need, or previous experience. I have no problem talking about my own issues. Um, and then how we overcome that. How can we
Yeah.
repair that or change that relationship?
Yeah. So I love that you shared very transparently that a lot of the early associations you had with money were bad or negative, right? To have money is a bad thing. And I think this is the case for many people. Due to, as I shared earlier, our financial socialization, we learn kind of what money represents in this power dynamic of the haves and the have-nots. And in the process of being able to identify who are the haves and who are the have-nots and trying to figure out where we fit on that spectrum, we can learn to develop a disdain for people who don't have money unintentionally, right? So, like, the disdain looks like I don't want to be like that, or I don't want to be viewed in that way, or I don't want to be treated like that individual. And we can develop a disdain for the people who have money, right? Like, they had to do something terrible to get that money. There is a moral flaw in that individual in order for them to have achieved that. And so your question, how do we control what we can control? And how do we move forward? I think what you shared is the first step, right? So I introduced a framework in my book that I refer to as the three E's of overcoming financial trauma, the three E's for short. And the first E stands for exposure. So it's identifying and recognizing that something exists, right? And so in this case, we're talking about financial trauma. We can identify what are the stories that we tell ourselves about money or our money story. And what are the narratives that we continue to hold when it comes to money and money's role in our lives? So I'm gonna keep focusing on you because you shared so much, and I think it's great. You talked about wanting to have your sons be further along than you were, right? My instant thought when you were saying that was you got to get their buy-in, right? And your motivations for wanting them to move along are informed by your experiences, but it's not their experiences. And so if you don't communicate to them what the reason why you're pushing them in the way or you're informing them in the way that they are, they're just gonna be like, well, mom's just, she's just pressuring us, right? And what the starting point is. And so there's a really interesting exercise that I do include in my book where I took it's referred to as a financial genogram. And so basically it's like a family tree that you draw out and you go up that family tree and you look at how did mom interact with money? What did mom believe about money? What are some of the big wins and some of the big losses when it comes to money? Are these patterns repeating in my life? How did grandpa? Same thing, right? And so you get to look across generations what these patterns look like as it relates to money and whether or not you're repeating those patterns. And so this is part of the exposure piece. So you understand that there's something, right? Whatever the relationship with money is, you get to name it. You get to say, okay, something that's outside of my control. This is the environment that I'm in. I want to move forward. The second E stands for education. So that's understanding how is this working in your body? Because many times when we look at money, we don't look at money through the lens of a threat, but our bodies through our evolutionary responses and responses specifically to stress and threats, often referred to as the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response, are responding to money as a threat, real or imagined. And because we're not socialized to view it that way, we're just kind of like, oh, this is business as usual. But when you think about opening your mail or sitting down to do a budget or planning for retirement or any of the things that require effort financially, right? You also should be paying attention, and oftentimes we're taught not to how that's showing up in your body, right? Is your heart rate going up? Are you sweating? Right? Is your mouth getting dry? Do you feel it in the pit of your stomach? Many times people when they're experiencing financial stress or this feeling of impending doom, right? Let's say you experience a layoff or a repossession or an eviction, you're going to feel like the pit of your stomach drop. That's a threat. That's your body responding to this threat, but you have no physical structure to point that to. So you're just internalizing that and you're holding on to it. So a lot of my work is informed certainly by my experience in the financial services space and just kind of understanding the math of one plus one equals two when it comes to navigating money. But I've done a lot of research on understanding trauma and particularly the somatic impact of trauma on our body. And what happens often from a trauma lens generally, but bringing it into the area of finance, is that trauma stays in our body. We never learn how to metabolize it. And so again, going back to that first E, it's being able to identify what this looks like. The second E, being able to understand how is this showing up in my body what is the education that I need? So this is where financial literacy is very important. What are the systems, tools, structures that I need to put in place in order to be successful financially, or to move myself from where I am into a different station financially? And then the last, the execution, speaks to doing the work. And this is where financial therapy shines. This is where financial counseling shines. And for the individuals who have maybe had never heard of financial therapy or are not ready to see a financial counselor, this is where you can engage in practices like future self visualization. This is where you can engage in practices like affirmations. This is where you can engage in practices like establishing financial boundaries. And so, because trauma rewires your brain, you are effectively recognizing, hey, trauma has happened. My brain has been rewired. There's nothing I can do about that. But I can work on what the version of me in the future looks like. So I'm going to engage in an active process of rewiring my brain in the way that I can control. And so that's where, as I mentioned, the affirmations, the future self visualization, the financial therapy, somatic healing, establishing financial boundaries, and building community all help to overcome the financial trauma that you might be experiencing or that you may have experienced.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. It's you're talking about basic therapy processes, therapeutic processes, but specifically geared toward finance, toward money and relationships with money. Relationships with yourself, relationships with your past, relationships with your parents, and how that informed your relationship with money. There's an exercise that I used to do when I was teaching people how to grow their businesses as entrepreneurs. And the first exercise was there were a series of statements that I would have them finish, that I would have them complete. Statements like, rich people are. If I had a lot of money, I would. If I were rich, I would. And just finishing those kinds of statements, there were like probably 12, 15 of those statements. Finishing those statements quickly helped people see their relationship with money, how they thought of themselves, how they thought of those kinds of words, difference between rich people or a lot of money. Just the two reframing, changing that frame. And it was very interesting when they would share, when they would finish those statements. And then all I would ask them is, how do you know that's true? Where did you see that was true? And it just uncovered a lot of those kinds of relationships and had them just start thinking about where that came from. And then the next question was, is that what you want to be true? And how can you change that to fit what you want to be true? And that, obviously I've dealt with whatever issues I've had to the extent that I am now, because as far as I'm concerned, I continue changing and continue growing and continue developing different relationships with money, with people every day that I'm lucky enough to wake up. But I've been able to do that so that I actually work for a company called Planet Wealth. When I was, 20, there's no way I would have worked for any kind of company like that, from my own understanding of my worthiness, and all those things are wrapped up in that. So how do you help people that, thank you for taking us through those three E's, and then how do you help people then take that next step once they deal with the trauma, once they deal with those emotions around money and those feelings and that relationship, now looking at being worthy of investing in certain things, or not taking that emotional feelings, those emotions about around money and finance into their wealth building journey. So how do you go from survival mode in money, it's kind of like the way I think about it, to flourishing and abundance in wealth?
Yeah, I love this question. So you shared something, and I just kind of want to go back to that. When you talked about the exercise that you do with entrepreneurs, right? This is helping them effectively change the narratives that they have when it comes to money, right? And so, as a part of that third E, the execution phase, I talk about changing your money narrative and the difference between your money story and your money narrative, right? I'll use myself as an example. As I was writing the book, I reached out to a good friend of mine who's also a financial therapist, and he's a Reiki master teacher. And so he combines Reiki with his financial therapy. And I'm like, hey, I'm talking the talk, but I really want to walk the walk. So let me experience a financial therapy session. And as we're working together, one of the things that comes up for me is that I am a good manager of money. This is the narrative that I tell myself. I am a good manager of money. And there's so many things in my experience that point to that, right? Including working in financial services. Of course, I'm a good manager of money. But 5 years ago, I left the banking industry to pursue entrepreneurship. Been an entrepreneur for the last 5 years. And as you have shared, like there's many moments of like, how am I going to pay my mortgage, right? How am I going to get this money? And so, what I learned in that financial therapy session, and it's funny that it took me 5 years to get to that point, was I don't view myself as a generator of money, right? I view myself as a manager of money. But if I don't have money to manage, then how effective am I going to be, right? And so just that slight shift and being able to recognize what is the narrative that I carry. And this narrative comes from childhood. This narrative comes from being an administrative arm in the household and helping my mom manage the household finances because we were struggling. And I was proud of that. And I made that a part of my identity. And I carried that forward in all the motivations and aspirations and accomplishments that I had made financially. But I never told myself I am a generator of money until we had that session. And even still, so we had that session back in, I want to say maybe June of last year. Even still, I see myself having to constantly reaffirm and remind myself, like, hey, I've been an entrepreneur for 5 years. Like I have created something out of nothing. Like I am a generator of money, right? But you have to believe that. And I think you have to believe that more than just on the intellectual level. So going back to your question, how do you help people move from where they are, and you refer to it as being in the scarcity mindset into maybe embracing more so of an abundance? We have to identify where the scarcity is coming from. First off, right? Many people are operating in this like survival state because they're actually in the practice of surviving, right? And so whether they recognize it or not, because when we talk about financial trauma, I think a lot of times people hear that phrasing and they're like, oh, that's just an experience that people who don't have money experience, right? I make good money, so I'm not on that target list, right? And the thing is, everybody can experience financial trauma. Everybody does experience financial trauma. Your level of vigilance around money, because you have it or because you make it, may be significantly greater through the lens of I need to protect the money that I make or the money that I have, as opposed to somebody who doesn't have the money and says, I need to make more money. Or I'm okay with where I'm at because having more money makes me a bad person. And so when we expand that lens of financial trauma to include individuals who have money, so this is high net worth, high income individuals, and say, hey, what does money represent to you? Right? And where you are right now. Does money represent power to you? Does money represent freedom to you? Does money represent safety to you, right? There are people who are high income who are still operating from a place of scarcity because they don't feel safe in their bodies when it comes to money. And so, going back to the question, the first thing for me is to help people recognize their safety and however they define that. Because you can intellectually move forward and your bank account can move forward, but your body is still stuck in the state of, I don't feel safe right now. So pause there. That is the first step, helping people recognize their safety. And then through a process that is certainly informed by therapy in the traditional mental health sense, and informed by the financial planning practice, we work through how do you establish SMART goals, right? What are those goals? How do we move forward into making those goals happen? Okay, you decide that you want to set up an emergency fund, or you want to budget, or you want to invest. How are the things in your life interrupting or creating friction in being able to accomplish those things personally, right? are you going out and hanging out with friends and spending money on the cocktail or the appetizer, right? Are you stuck on Amazon doom scrolling and buying, whatever the shiny product is in front of you? And also, I think this is a super important point, taking the shame and the guilt out of it, right? So many people navigate shame and guilt from making decisions that they want to make because they feel like they should be making other decisions. And the issue that I find in working with people is that oftentimes the reason why they keep experiencing that like clash is because their articulated values and their articulated goals are not in alignment, right? So we help people move closer to alignment with their goals and their values so that they can say that this is what they want and then they can move in that direction. Sometimes that feels hard. And so there's a bit of hand holding and accountability there, not through the lens of I'm the drill sergeant and you need to drop and give me 50, but through the lens of let me hold up a mirror and show you that, hey, this is what you said you wanted, right? Um, let's explore what is causing these interruptions or these disruptions, right? You're prioritizing buying the cocktail or the appetizer. I'm just using this as an example because it's a real example. Um, somebody that I've worked with, what I realized was this is a couple, they prioritized spending time with friends, right? That was the value. But that value was wrapped up in every time I spend time with friends, we have to go out to the fancy restaurant and then buy the round of drinks and then buy the appetizer. So if we can untangle the financial impact of spending time with friends, we can create language that say, hey, I value spending time with you. I'm not turning you down because I don't want to spend time with you. In fact, here's an alternative way for us to be able to spend time that is in alignment with my goals, but I cannot spend money every time I want to spend time with you because and they get to decide what that looks like, right? This particular individual or couple wanted to pay down debt, so they were dealing with debt as an issue. But they didn't have like they were ashamed or they're embarrassed to communicate that with their friends. Cool. Don't tell your friends that you have to pay down debt, but tell them that you have priorities financially that you have to funnel in that way. And hey, why don't you come over? Why don't we have a day at the house, right? And so there's a lot of I think what's really interesting about this space is it's not advising in the sense of, as I said, drill sergeant, I'm telling you what you should do. It is counseling as a partner and saying, this is what you shared with me you want to do. Now let's explore what's preventing you from being able to make that happen. And really leaving the accountability on them, but being there. Because I think a huge part of healing financial trauma is that building of community. And so if I, as a financial professional, get to be a part of your community and being able to say, hey, I'm here to support you through the lens of my expertise or simply by the lens of my presence, cool, right? Like that's a
Yeah.
win for me.
Yeah, definitely. That's amazing. So a couple of things I love what you said. Going back to the safety issue, there's an online influencer that I follow and that I've met, and we've spoken on the same page, the same stages, and he has built incredible companies. He's sold several of them. He has declared, I'm financially independent. I've got myself set. My kids are set. Everything's set. I don't have to work. Um, and when he talks about that, part of his identity and part of his online presence was, I was a welfare baby. It's what he says. I was a welfare baby raised by a single mom, very survival mode. And I was on a call with him on a community call because he has a very strong community. And he started crying, saying, I just realized I'm safe. I'm finally safe. That's all I've been
When you
looking
said that, I
for.
got goosebumps. I just want to say
I'm
that when you
telling
said
you,
that,
it was amazing. And that's what he said. He said, I'm finally safe. I've taken care of my mom, my siblings. I'm safe. And it was like a realization that that was what he was after the whole time. It is so true for so many of us raised in more survival situations. So that's the first thing. It's a please, anyone listening who had any kind of an emotional reaction to that, and any kind of an emotional reaction to that safety idea. Um, it's a very deep thing, and it's a very scary thing, and much of that really informs everything we do, and the way we look at the world, and the way we look at ourselves, and the way we look at specifically money, which is the vehicle that we might equate with safety. So that's the first thing. Thank you for bringing that to light. And then going to some of the situations that you brought up with the couple, helping us, so let's say now, okay, I've got it. I've gone through that emotion of, oh my gosh, yes, it is about safety. How do I do this? How do I communicate? How do I align my goals and my actions? And without, so here's the big key that most of us are afraid of, without decreasing my status in the eyes of the people that I would like to include in my social circle, and I don't want to have them look down on me. So it's a big thing to not decrease my status, which is what that couple didn't want to do. They didn't want to decrease their status with their friends, thinking, "Oh, she's in debt, he's in debt. Let's not let that rub off on us," right? Kind of idea.
Mhm.
So
Yep.
decreasing your status, decreasing your self-worth, even just saying some of these words make you feel like I'm not worthy of what I'm doing. There's so much wrapped up in this, that if we just verbalize it with someone safe like yourself, with our community where we do feel safe, and so few, I really don't think there are very many communities or very many um, social circles that we feel safe talking about these things, even though I guarantee you, anyone listening to this podcast, everyone you know has these same feelings. You are human. These are universal human experiences. You're not as unique as you might think. You're not as different as you might feel. So anyway, I just had to unpack what you just talked about. So how can people move from that shame, that guilt, into that agency and clarity so that they can move forward?
Yeah. The um the financial socialization, I use that phrase a lot, and I realize in this conversation I probably said it maybe 3 or 4 times now. Really is kind of the residual impact of our economic system, right? So we're in a capitalist society, and capitalism drives that feeling of isolation, right? It drives that feeling of I have to do this by myself, individualism. And so we don't feel safe communicating with other people who likely are experiencing the same things that we're experiencing because of, again, that financial socialization. And it's not because somebody sat us down and said, these are the rules, right? You can't talk about money, you can't, right? um but it is what we observe. Like you said, you talk about this decreasing of status in the eyes of other people, right? That goes back into that whole idea of the have and the have nots, right? Like, I don't want to be viewed as a have not. And so,
Right.
in the book, I talk about culture, right? Money is definitely a huge part of culture for us. And I talk about this idea of offering up culture, because oftentimes when we look at that word, we think language, religion, ethnicity, region of origin, right? We don't think workplace. We don't think maybe holidays. We don't think, um, what is the established norm in our engagement with friends and family, right? Um, it is within some people's culture to not show up to somebody's house without bringing a gift, right?
Right.
It is within some people's culture in the workplace to, hey, let's all chip in and buy our boss a present for Christmas, right? It is within the workplace culture. I'm picking on the workplace intentionally here for us to let's gather after work and do happy hour. And what does that look like if you reject the workplace culture in any of those examples, right? If you show up at the person's house without the gift, if you say, "Hey, I'm going to abstain from contributing to the gift for our boss. Hey, I don't want to go to happy hour," right? You're viewed as not being a team player. You're viewed as not being engaged. You're viewed as, just kind of like this misfit in some ways. And so you're taking this idea around culture and what are the things that we just kind of pick up and inherit and say, hey, why don't we put some intentional spin on this? Maybe we create a culture within our community, whether that be I'll use you as an example. You talked about wanting to again have your sons progress beyond where it is that you started. Maybe it's a household culture that you say, hey, we're gonna have a monthly money meeting where we talk about concerns, wins, losses, everything related to money. And it's guided and we all have the buy-in of each other to feel safe and to be able to talk about this. I saw a really interesting piece of content. I don't remember which social platform it was on, but it was a young lady who had her mom, her dad, and her boyfriend in the audience. And she had a PowerPoint presentation on a television. And she does, I think it was TikTok actually. She does her Amex Platinum card wrapped. So, like how Spotify does wrapped. And she has a slideshow and she goes through each month of the year and say, this is how much money I spent in January. This is how much money I spent in February. This is how much, all the way throughout the year and she talks about the peaks and the valleys of what that spending behavior looked like for the boyfriend's birthday. The spending looked a little bit higher for Christmas. The spending looked a little bit higher for a planned vacation. The spending looked a little bit higher. And it was interesting because the comment section was going crazy based off of how she positioned it. She's like, "This is what my spending for the year look like as somebody who is not wealthy or something to that effect." And people were like, uh, a little bit tone deaf, like, "You don't realize that you have access to an Amex card and you're spending between $1,000 and $3,000 a month, and somebody's paying for it for you, right?" Like the dad sitting there, like, "Ugh." But what I thought was cool about it was that mom, dad, boyfriend were sitting in the audience and they were going over what her spending looked like, and she was very proud of the months that she spent less than $1,000 on her credit card, right? From a financial education perspective, some people would be like, well, she shouldn't be using a credit card at all. Like, this is ridiculous, right? But she was socializing her behavior with money with her family, right? This is culture, right? Something she was allowed to feel safe in that environment with her family. And she felt comfortable sharing with her family, up to and including the boyfriend, right? The boyfriend sitting there, right? And so we only saw this maybe 30-second or minute long clip. Don't know if this is something that everybody's doing, likely not, right? But I just think that that's a great example of what that can look like in households. And then we can start there and expand out into our friend groups. Like, hey, let's get together. And I have a friend that I was on the phone with yesterday. He's wanting to do a business plan. He's like, let's meet up for dinner on Tuesday and I'll come to your house, we'll order some food, and we'll sit down and we'll do our business plans. And of course, there's a financial implication to that, right? But like we have a culture within our friendship to say, hey, we can be very honest with each other about what this looks like for us. And as you continue to establish and offer culture, it will grow, right? So community is defined by you, right? You get to choose who's you don't get to choose who's your family, right? Like, but you get to choose who's a part of your community. You get to choose, what are the rules for engagement, and you get to establish safety in that space. Because, and here's a curveball, as we talk about financial trauma through an individualistic lens, I very much believe that financial trauma is a societal issue, right? It's a societal harm that we have to have a communal response to. You cannot have an individual response to a communal or societal harm. You can take agency, and I know this is the question that you asked. You can have agency in your own decisions around money, but that only goes so far, right? And so you have to offer this up to your community, to your society, so that this healing can take place. Um, and much of our reaction to this feeling of being unsafe is manufactured, right? This idea of scarcity is manufactured. The way that we are marketed and advertised to, it causes our nervous system to be in this constant state of, oh no, I don't have enough. I'm not safe unless I buy the new iPhone. I'm not safe unless I go get me a new MacBook, right? I'm not safe unless I have the brand new clothes. I'm not safe unless I have the nice car. And how does this kind of like permeate into the other areas of our life, including, where we work and how we're perceived in the workplace, whether or not our clients will respect us based off of how we showed up, right? Whether or not our partner will respect us based off of our ability to provide or not provide, based off whether or not our kids will respect us or love us, based off of our ability to give them what is it they want when they want it, whether or not we will respect ourselves because we are holding ourselves to this standard of performance that somebody else gave to us and we never had time to deconstruct and decide for ourselves. I know I shared a lot there in response to your question, but I do think that a big part of helping people to move forward in establishing that safety is also teaching them how to create culture and offer that up in the building of community.
Absolutely. And it is, well, when you talked about capitalism and the individual, that is so true. And the people who were judging that gal based on their own experiences and saying, well, you have a credit card or somebody else is paying, whatever those were from their own perspective. And if we're all equally poor, then we're not going to be worried too much about judging our neighbors about how much money they have. So the difference between capitalism, socialism, communism, whatever other frameworks, political frameworks, and societal frameworks, we will all carry those experiences into those different isms, if you will. But what you shared about being in a community and having that safety is so important. Now, for those people listening, if they think they're in this space, they don't think they have any issues with their relationship with money. The last thing I'd like to ask is, how does this show up? Let's say I'm sitting here going, "Yeah, I don't know what these guys are talking about. I'm fine. I've got all the money in the bank. I go on vacations. I give my kids presents, but I make them do chores. I'm good. I don't have any issues with this." How might this show up in their world? That might be an indication of, well, you might want to look at how you really have a relationship with money.
I have a lot of thoughts. First off, the first thought that rather the avatar of the individual that came into my mind as you were saying that, having worked in financial services and banking specifically, is the housewife who is not generating income, but her husband goes out. He's a high earner. She's, managing the household. She's taking care of the kids. She doesn't have to worry about the checkbook. She doesn't have to worry about paying the bills. She is comfortable. She has this feeling of safety, right? And then the husband suddenly passes away. And now she's in a situation where she has to pay the bills and she has to manage a lot of the kind of like detailed intricacies of the family finances, and she's not prepared because she's never had to do it. And suddenly that feeling of safety turns into like this feeling of not scarcity, but survival, right? This is a real life story. I had a customer who I helped. Um, they had money, but she never used online banking. She never wrote a check. She had two kids. They were getting ready to go off to college. And she would come into the bank every single day with her statements. And she just wanted us to explain to her what was going on. And so, excuse me, we had to um, kind of teach her how to navigate these financial products and services, um, In the end, she ended up being partnered with, like, a client advisor. The bank provided her that based off of her balances. But what about the people that don't qualify for that? Or even the people that do qualify for that, but their advisor is, operating in a very limited capacity in terms of what their support looks like. Like, that advisor is not holding their hand on a day-to-day basis and dealing with, the random pop-ups of life's circumstances. And certainly, if she was not the breadwinner, yes, you have money now, but let's, project this out 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. What does your livelihood look like in the future? Are you going to need to get a job, or is what was left behind for you something that is going to sustain you throughout your life? I'll use another example, with an individual who is the primary breadwinner, and they're like, "Hey, I feel safe." Like, we'll use the example of the guy that you mentioned earlier. I finally got to this point of freedom, in that moment of realization for him, and recognizing that he's gotten to this moment of safety and financial freedom. There's still a version of him that had to exist for him to get to that place. And that is not something that occurs in a light switch moment, right? You may have the light switch realization, but deconstructing all of the narratives and the behaviors and the habits around establishing safety for yourself. And we can throw in the different ingredients of machismo and um you know what does agency look like through a masculine lens, and saying, hey, nobody cares about my excuses. I mean, you will see the narratives online. I have to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I have to take the code plunge, and I have to, hustle culture, hustle culture, hustle culture. People are still acting in a state, maybe they're performing on a high level, right? But we were not designed to be in this constant state of vigilance, right? Your response in that way, if I can make a comparison, you think about the early human beings who were not the top of the food chain, right? We were not the apex predator. And we had to navigate the lions and the tigers and the bears, right? You had to be mindful of where you fell asleep, and how you would attract attention to you through sense, through noise, through presence, right? You're in a state of vigilance and adrenaline, and this is only supposed to last in the short period of time to get you from a place of danger to safety. But we have manufactured a culture around uh having these sustained periods. And when I say sustained, I mean periods of some people's entire life, right? Years and years and years of this experience of vigilance. Individuals who are in this space never learn how to relax. They're always hustling. They're always looking for more, right? I saw a clip of a um interview between Tony Robbins and Alex Hormozy. Um, and Tony's giving Alex advice, and he's like, if you are in this for the money, like, there'll never be enough, right? You'll always be looking for the next thing. And so he's like kind of giving Alex advice through the lens of like this, like, purpose. What is driving you from a purpose driven perspective? And I didn't watch the whole interview, but that clip stood out to me because Alex Ramosi, I don't know him personally. I'm talking about him like I know him personally. Alex Ramosi is younger than I am, but he tells his story all the time. He has acquired and sold several businesses. I mean, he's made a ton of money. Now he teaches people how to make a ton of money through these systems that he's developed. But being in his early 30s and having all the money that he can want in this moment, right? Um, he Tony's basically kind of like advising him, like, hey, it'll never be enough. It'll never be enough unless what you're doing is anchored by some kind of purpose. And so your goal in this season of your life is to establish what is that purpose, right? You're good, but what is your purpose? And so in the last chapter of my book, I talk about responsibility to society, corporate responsibility, philanthropy, right? if you feel like you are in a place where you don't have to worry about anything financially because of what's coming in or because of what you've accumulated, you can intentionally continue to I don't want to use the word fund, even though that's ultimately where I'm going to land. You can fuel the establishment of greater communities through the things that are important to you, the purpose that drives you, right? Whether that is providing people with structures for education, whether that is providing people with funding for training so that they can go out and do that education, whether that's just from a tax perspective, right? Some people are looking for the tax write-off and they just donate to, random charities that they don't know what the bottom line looks like. Maybe you get in the weeds and you understand what the bottom line looks like. And so you use your money in an intentional way that helps facilitate not only healing on a communal level, but likely healing on an individual level because you are solving for something that was vacant in your journey to where it is that you have arrived to.
Wow. Wow, that's fantastic. Rakim, thank you so much for joining me on this amazing conversation and contributing such incredible insights to this conversation. I have enjoyed talking to you. I say this a few times when I talk to people, but I have a feeling I'm going to be having another conversation with you sometime very soon because these are concepts we all grapple with. And the more we can make sense of them, the more we can have clarity around them, the better our lives will be, the easier our lives will be, the more at peace, hopefully, we can become. So thank you so much for spending this time with me. All of your information will be in the show notes. We can, if you want to follow Rakim and learn more about what he does, please look at the show notes. Please look at the information on our page on our site for this podcast episode. Is there any last piece of advice you'd like to share or any last comment you'd like to make to the people listening?
Yeah, well, first off, thank you for having me, and I really enjoyed talking to you as well. I would just reiterate that point around financial trauma, viewing it through the lens of a societal harm and not just an individualistic one. You said something earlier that, everybody, we're not as unique as we think we are, right? And financial trauma shines a light on the fact that we are more similar than we are different, particularly when it comes to our responses to this threat that we don't recognize necessarily as a threat, but our bodies do rather. So yes, let's look at financial trauma through certainly let's heal individually, but let's also heal collectively. And um, and then I just will plug Overcoming Financial Trauma. Uh, Published by Wiley in November of 2025. It is available everywhere books are sold. I talk about everything that I've talked about in this episode and more. So definitely check it out and please, please, please leave a review.
Thank you so much. I hope you have a fantastic day and stay warm up there in the Northeast.
Yes, will do. Thank you.
Want to go beyond listing and take real action? Get access to our next Money Raisers Masterclass and join us to discover a funding strategy that can unlock up to $50,000 to $5 million.